The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Good evening, Leigh. Good afternoon to you. Good evening to me. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. We're very far apart in time zones. I think we're about 7 hours apart from each other.
7 hours apart. I am in Upper Egypt, which is actually south of Cairo. I'm right on the Nile River in Aswan, Egypt, right now. As you can tell from my colorful background. But true to as I learned a long time ago, branding is everything. So the podcast logo remains.
That's right.
That's
Yep. One of the best marketing people I ever worked with said everything communicates. So
That's right.
there you go.
That's right. And as you can hear, my voice is shot. I've actually been on the road now through France and then coming to Egypt. I've been on the road now for the better part of 2 weeks. I'm almost done. I'm at the home stretch. So I might cough every now and then. So if I do, just make fun of me. Like
Okay.
that.
All right.
So basically, although we were done for the year, we were done. Our schedule, our recording schedule was done. But here, I reached out to Leigh and said, you know what? I've just been experiencing so many different cases of history being rewritten here that I can't wait till next year. I can't wait a whole 3 weeks. I need to actually see if we can record. So Leigh, true to herself, was like, we'll find a way to make it happen.
Well, I was super excited to do it. I honestly was wondering about you. I wasn't going to pester you while you were there, but I was truly wondering about what was going on and whether I was going to hear from you in Egypt.
You and my kids both. So I talked to I've talked to my wife. I talked to my son. I haven't talked to my daughter yet, and for some odd reason, she doesn't actually need to talk to me.
Yeah, no, they get to be a certain age, Ashish. They really don't need to. They don't need.
She'll talk to Taylor Swift all day long, but she won't talk to me.
Yeah.
I guess I really am the problem. It's me.
The problem is you. Well, for the moment, it's temporary. I can promise you that it's temporary.
Yeah, well, I mean, considering my son goes away to school, it better be temporary. I mean, I told her,
It will be. And trust me, the minute there's a problem, yours will be the first. You'll be on speed dial.
Oh, that's what I'm hoping. Actually, whenever she gets scared, she comes over to me. She doesn't go to her mom. My wife is like, "Wait, I can help you too." I'm like, "No, no, no. I want the big burly dude." So she comes over to me. So speaking of big burly dudes, we're in Egypt. So
yeah.
I'm in Egypt. And as I said, I wanted to talk about rewriting history because that's actually what's happened. I want to tell you what happened to me yesterday. And this episode, I want to talk about the need for us to think critically, right? It applies to all aspects of life, from politics to work to love to everything else. But I really want to talk about thinking critically because it's so important. But for more reasons than we think, right? I mean, I want to tell you what happened to me yesterday. So I just got into Aswan. I've actually spent a couple of days in Luxor. We were going up and down to all the temples. One of the best ways to see Luxor is from a hot air balloon. So we were up in a hot air balloon looking out over Luxor. And I'm going to be back here in a few months, actually, to do this again. I'm coming with my family. But, as we're looking down, we could see how all this farmland was being unearthed, right? So meaning that the residents are being they're being moved, right? Voluntary or involuntarily. That's a controversial topic. But there was artifacts and tombs and everything else being found underneath their land. So from a hot air balloon, you could see where the sand's being dug up. And then you could see where they're finding new things. You could see where they're starting to see things. And something dawned on me today as I'm with a group of people and I'm kind of helping to explain to them something that I've noticed since coming here since I was 15 years old. And something that's always stuck to me. But I wanted to show them what was important about this. And it's something that I knew, but it didn't really click until yesterday. We were looking at a couple of these temples and I saw high watermarks somewhere near the top of the temples. And then I looked back and what blew my mind is that, could you just imagine for a second that you can see the dark side of the moon? I go, what do you mean? I go, well, when you look at the moon and you see it's not full, cover up one eye and see if you can see the other side of it, right? The side the sun's not reflecting, but you got to make it a silhouette.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I said, close your eyes. Picture that for a second. They did. I said, can you see the other side of the moon? Can you feel your brain starting to focus on the dark side, on the other side of the moon, on the dark side of the moon? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Can you see the craters on that side? Can you see where the sun's light is not reflecting, but you can still see where some of the light is still, going off on that side? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I said, okay. Now I want you to imagine that this tomb you just saw, the temple rather, that you just saw, that is higher than, God, higher than anything you could think of, was underwater at one point, and it was underground at one point, meaning the ground zero, or the sea level was as high as the top of that temple, and probably a little bit higher because of erosion. But because of solid sand erosion, land erosion, just a little bit at a time, some of this stuff is being uncovered. All of a sudden, these eyes just opened up, including mine, saying, "I'm not even sure how that's even possible."
I'm
But
not
yeah,
either. How is that possible?
so when you look at the canyons around the temples, you
Hmm.
start seeing all these sedimentary lines.
Okay.
You start seeing all these lines, and you start seeing that at one point, terra firma was much higher. Terra firma was at the very top. The watermark was here. It wasn't a tidal wave or anything like that. But the ground itself, back 6,000 years ago, was that high. That was the natural level of the ground. And over 6,000 years, it has eroded to lower levels, lower levels. You could see it. You go through a canyon, you start seeing those lines of sedimentary rock through the canyons, but you see these lines that look like high water marks, and they are. Take like the Grand Canyon, for example.
So, so what? These were there, and then
They
sea
were
level
there.
rose,
The
and
sea
then
level was that high.
it was that
so
high. How are there watermarks? How were? I'm not. You got to help.
So, yeah, no, this is exactly what they were asking me. So their watermarks at the top, meaning the sea, this was all underwater. So you know how a rock or a seashell, when it sits under the ocean or under any kind of body of water, when you take it out, there's lines on it. There's some sort of characteristics to it that tell you that this has been through some sort of current,
Hmm.
right? Or some.
Yeah.
That's what's happening at the top of these temples.
Hmm.
You see that at some point, the natural ground level or natural zero line for ground level was the top of these temples, right? So meaning that there was so much sediment, so many layers of sedimentary rock that were much higher, that the river, everything else was flowing much wider, right? The Nile, where the
Hmm.
Nile flows, the girth of the Nile was much wider than it is right now, right? The East
Hmm.
Bank and the West Bank was further away than they are right now. The watermark, meaning the level of the Nile, was much higher than it is right now. The level of terra firma was much higher than it is right now. What we seem, and you start thinking about that and go, what we think is 200 feet above sea level, or 300 feet above sea level, or 500 feet above sea level, at one point was zero.
Wow.
That was the zero mark.
Hmm.
That's what the first civilizations were working on.
That's amazing.
Isn't it? And
Yeah.
then and I started thinking about that. And I remember I turned to the people I'm with and I said, I'm 47 years old. I've been coming here since I was a teenager. And as I'm explaining it to you, it's picturing in my head what this
Mm-hmm.
looks like, what this, and starting to really understand what this element is about. And they looked at me and they said, "It took you that long?" I said, "Look, I'm not slow, but it did take me that long." Now imagine if somebody actually allows us somebody actually starts thinking critically, they'll get it much faster. And that brought me onto the topic of critical thinking. And I said, the reason that it didn't take me that long, that it took me this long, and I knew that was there, but the reason that it took me this long to put two and two together. And I consider myself a pretty smart person. I did well in school. I do work hard, and the people around me are very smart, like yourself and whatnot.
Mm.
What I what I came to realize was that I read books on ancient Egypt. I was in lectures about ancient Egypt. I listened. I learned. I didn't question enough.
Mm.
And this actually was drilled home to me, I want to say 20, yeah, about probably 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It was drilled into me because I started reading an article about how there are museums in the US who are looking at the way the Romans mummify and comparing it to the way the Peruvians mummify in those ancient empires, pre-Inca,
Mm-hmm.
and they are similar, very, very similar. Then you time them. You go to a museum in Lima, and start timing the empires. It's
Mm-hmm.
about the same time.
I remember you talking about this a little
Mhm.
bit before.
So then I started taking my own advice. Exactly. You remember we were talking about
The
this,
Field
right?
Museum, right? Because
Right,
there's,
right.
yeah.
That was one of them. That was, but
Mhm.
remember we were talking about this. Remember we were basically
Mhm.
just talking about what this looks like.
Right.
One of the things that then drew me in was the fact that I said, okay, if the high watermark is here, if these museums are saying this, then I'm clearly not asking enough questions.
Mm.
So I started doing more digging, started doing more research. And I did something that I don't really have much free time, but I kind of thought that it might be worth doing. I took the Nile from the Mediterranean all the way down. I traced it down to Lake Victoria, which we know it reaches.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started taking it to tributaries, little tributaries, and I started looking at historical maps, not the current
Mm-hmm.
ones. It reached down towards the waters of Angola
Mm.
and into what is now the Zambezi River, into what is now Victoria Falls. And as I'm doing this research, I come across this study. It was a dissertation actually from a college student that was published that I really loved reading. And what it
Mm.
talked about was that the Nile River and every tributary and line that was associated with this river, all the way down to the Zambezi and up towards, maybe this wasn't a river, maybe this was a fault line.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Maybe
that makes sense.
maybe the continent actually was separated.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this section of Africa was actually part of Asia or something else, and this part. And you start looking at where the Nile flows, and guess what side these temples, the high watermarks, would have been on?
The
Where the
the west side, right?
right
The
where
Peru side.
exactly.
Yeah.
So exactly, and where the rivers, and you think about this, if that really is a fault line and that's where the continent was divided, then that's the ocean, not the river at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the ocean and the ocean was much higher than now it starts making sense. You have plate tectonics and plates moving around, and the fact that they're sinking and they were higher at one point. We all know that different plates are sinking all over the world. We've had earthquakes that have moved Sumatra, earthquakes that have moved specific islands. The Maldives actually getting lower in altitude, lower in their level above the ocean in terms of their sea level is being reset every year. You start going back and say, what if it wasn't the Nile? What if the Nile wasn't that high? What if this was a fault line? What if that was the ocean that was actually that high? That's pretty plausible.
That makes sense. That makes a lot
Mm-hmm.
more sense. Yeah.
And then it dawned on me when you start seeing the rock marks. It's all
Mm.
limestone.
Mm.
Limestone. Limestone. And it's porous. And it
Mm-hmm.
looks like it's oxidated in some point.
Mm.
The only thing I know that oxidates things like that is salt water.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I start thinking of chemistry and going, should have asked more questions. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked more questions in school. Now, mind you, I was telling somebody today, I had two classes in my university that were by far my most, I guess, my most loved or my most popular classes, right?
Yeah.
One was Greek mythology, an
Yeah.
in-depth review of Greek mythology, and that it actually delved into the Greeks conquering Egypt. It started with ancient Egypt and the Greeks conquering Egypt. I had a visiting professor from Harvard that was talking about ancient civilizations, and you talked about Egypt. And then I had this professor who focused on Greek mythology. The second one was an in-depth semester on the Holocaust.
Mm.
And that professor changed my life. His father was a soldier for the Nazis. But he was secretly Jewish.
Mm.
And
Wow.
it was yeah. Anyway, side topic, but it was still both these classes changed my mind, and I started thinking about that class on Greek mythology. Going, I should have asked more questions. I didn't ask enough questions.
Well, you
And
didn't know. You weren't equipped with you didn't know what you didn't know, right?
I didn't know what I didn't know.
Cliche.
So
So you didn't know that you needed to ask those questions.
What's the phrase we always use here? Rabbit holes, right? We go down
Yeah.
rabbit holes all the
Yeah.
time. Okay, so I went down a rabbit hole as I was doing this research, while I was reading this
Hmm.
paper. If I said if that's a fault line and that's the case, then what if the same thing applies to Greece? Because some of the pillars and some of the architecture in where I am right now in Aswan is this is the Ptolemaic period is here. This is where you get some of the best examples of Greek history in Egypt.
Mm.
And you start going through here and you start looking at those and going, what about the erosion there? Is it oxidation there? And it was the same thing.
Interesting.
It was the same thing. You start saying, well, and then you start thinking about, okay, if this was in fact a fault line, and the Sinai Peninsula on the Sinai side of Egypt, which was along with every other part of Africa that was along that fault line known as the Nile River, and the tributaries associated to it. If that was part of Asia, part of something else, what about the other side?
Mm-hmm.
And then you start thinking, wait a second, here's the Straits of Gibraltar. Here's where it passes through. What if that strait did, and the Straits of Gibraltar, you and I have read about this, and it goes back centuries.
Mm-hmm.
This is not something new. It goes back to the earliest forms of civilization, maybe not Egypt, but it is pretty far back. Well, you start thinking about Greece. Go, well, if we're connecting Greece to Egypt because of where they are, but maybe this particular plate, as you said, the western side was not actually floating here, but was further west than we think. What if at that point, and what if that point we're close enough to Peru? What if the way the Greeks came in was the way other people? I mean, it just started snowballing. At some point, I had to pull Austin Powers and go, oh, I've gone cross-eyed.
So have you found anyone who can confirm your theory?
No.
No, you haven't found anybody who's studying this?
There are lots of people studying it.
Yeah.
But here's what happens. As they're studying it, they're finding their own theories.
Oh.
There's new theories. So I'll give you an example. There are archaeologists in Luxor that just uncovered a brand new chamber of tombs, which we saw off the hot air balloon. They just discovered that, I think, a month ago, 2 months ago. Okay, so brand new discovery. They found jewels in these tombs. These are not royal tombs. These are not royal tombs. But everything we've been taught with history is that the royal tombs were the only ones that were buried with their jewels, but these were not royal tombs. And all of a sudden,
they weren't royal tombs. They didn't have the markings.
They had the markings, correct. And then you start seeing where they were, and you start looking at the tombs, and there's elements of Roman history within these tombs. Roman influence in the tombs. So now you start asking more questions. We knew that ancient Rome had conquered Egypt as well. So you knew that they had conquered Greece, and Egypt came with it. So we knew that was there. We start asking more questions. And then I start thinking about this cave system above Hatshepsut's temple in Luxor called Abd Rasul. And I was actually down in this cave system 2 years ago.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yep. It was a chairlift going in and seeing everything there. And then I started thinking, I looked back at the video that I took inside that cave. There's nothing in that cave, but this was the cave that actually, when the tomb raiders actually looted the royal tombs and took the mummies and everything, and they hid them. This is where they hid them, in this cave system. And it was a couple of goats and a family that found them in the late 1800s. And these tombs are now sitting in a museum in Cairo. And you start, I remember thinking about this limestone formation, thinking about the watermarks. Do you know, when I went down into that cave system, I started looking at the video again. And I think you have this video, and I'll send it to you if you want.
I do,
you can see it. It's the same calcified rock. It's calcified. It's not limestone, or if it is, it's completely calcified limestone.
Wow.
There's no glacier lakes here, but it's calcified. It's completely white. All right. Well, there is a white desert in Egypt. You start asking more questions. You start asking about calcification of sand. You start thinking about salt flats. You start thinking about everything else. And I was like, wait a second. Now, again, another theory floats up, and another, and another. Now you're again pulling the Austin Power, goes, oh, my brain's gone cross-eyed. But it's what it does is this is, I think what it told me was that we talk a lot about our education system. We talk a lot about the faults of our education system, what it's doing well and not doing well. It's not the teachers, it's the students. We as parents must be teaching our children to think critically at every juncture. If somebody tells us something, go read about it and see what you believe, right? Everything in life is about perception.
Mm-hmm.
right? There are 5 different ways to make 1 plus 1 equal 2, or equal 3 if you're a banker. But there's basically there, or 5 if you're part of the IMF. But in terms of this, I can't help myself. But in terms of this, actually, it's up to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
We as parents, I thought about this, and I thought about when my children were younger, and I asked myself, what is one question I wished I had asked them? We always ask, "How's your day?"
Sure.
Right? How's your day?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you do today? You know the one question I wish I had asked?
No. What?
What didn't you believe today?
What didn't you believe today?
Hmm? What didn't you believe today?
Hmm.
And why?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or
That's a good one.
what did you hear that you wanted that you need to think about? Or what did you hear that you're having trouble processing? It's not the teacher. It's not the teaching guide. They're doing great. We as parents, we're not saying, what didn't you believe the teacher told you? We're simply saying, what didn't you believe today? Or what are you still processing that you can't seem to get your hands around or your head around?
Right.
What did you, or here's a better way. What did you chew on today?
Mm.
Right? The right student will understand what that means.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if the thoughts I'm having right now, I had when I was 15 years old?
That you who knows?
I
Who
mean,
knows? You might be up
15.
for a Nobel Prize. You might have discovered something completely.
Well, most kids, a lot of kids would be up for Nobel Prizes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kids, right? Think about this. Your amazing daughters. Think about this. What if you had asked them that question when they were 10, 12,
Mm.
15?
Mm-hmm.
And and here's the best part. What if one day they gave you an answer that you went, wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's find out more about that.
Right.
There are dissertations, and I found this. There were so many dissertations that I found written on different topics within this.
Interesting.
Last year, I was in a burial chamber in Saqqara that was found a few months before. Went down by a rope in this burial chamber. The mummies were there. The coffins were still there. The decorative work on these coffins blew my mind.
Mm.
It wasn't a royal tomb. It was a tomb of a noble. But the amount of mummies they found here, and you start looking at the headdress, and now all of a sudden, a lot of the stuff they're finding, they're wearing the same headdress.
You mean everyone in the tomb is wearing the same headdress, or
other tombs?
Other tombs.
Other tombs in the same area. They're finding the depictions of the hieroglyphics and the depictions of the wall. They're wearing the same headdress.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's rewriting history.
Mm-hmm.
Just what we found in Luxor, the fact that we had jewels. Every single person I spoke to here saying that's not supposed to be that way.
Wow.
Why not?
Interesting.
Well, it's just not. That's not how we were taught. What
Not
didn't
how
you
we were
believe?
taught. Right.
Right. Not how we were taught, what we were taught.
What we were taught. Right.
What didn't you believe today? Right. What
Mm-hmm.
I'm you know, I'm going to be going back and telling my children that when they have kids, that's what grandpa's asking.
Well, something we all need to ask ourselves every day, especially in this era of AI and our access to information, which, I have to question, I have to fact check everything. I feel I have to. I'm not sure everyone does, but
right. Play it forward.
I can't take anything at face value anymore.
No, because you don't know what's real.
Right.
I mean, you don't know what's real. You have to fact check it. And we're not talking about intent, right? A good person's a good person. A bad person's a bad person. We're not talking about that. But it is very much this notion that, you have to basically, you have to fact check. But fact check is up to interpretation.
It is. You're right. Absolutely. You're right about that too.
You can form 10 different conclusions from one dissertation. At least you're forming 10.
Mm-hmm.
We're not forming any.
Mm.
Right? I mean, play it forward. I'm not going to get into politics, but I want to talk about this for a second. Around the world, we always talk about how they elect that person, right? And I'm not, whether it's at home or abroad, wherever the case, how they elect that person, whoever it is, right? And right now, our listeners are filling in the blank in their head of who they think I'm talking about. Interpretation, right? Interpretation. Oh, he's talking about so-and-so. He's talking about so-and-so. I might be, I might not be. Right? I don't have a name in my mind. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
And we talk about the, countries that make voting mandatory. You have to vote or you get fined.
Yeah.
And then you go to vote and what's the most common phrase you hear? It's a lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
It's a lesser of two evils.
Right.
We would do a better job electing officials and have the ability to send both home, or all three or all four or all five back and say, no, these are not my questions. These questions are not being answered. The process, whether it's a primary process or a parliamentary process or a no confidence vote or whatever the case may be, whatever the system is, the process would be probably a bit messier. But the right minds would come forward more often than not because we're asking that question, what didn't you believe today? Right? What didn't you believe? Right? Anybody who's listening right now who's trying to fill in the blank of who they think I'm talking about, that's a reflection of, that's not my reflection. That's you basically thinking as to, okay, this person's thinking about that person or that person. I'm not. I'm talking in general. I don't care if it's the US or Timbuktu. I'm talking in general. We talk worldwide. Oh, well, that person was elected again. Oh, how'd that person get elected again? Oh my God, that country elected went this way. Oh, they went so far right or left. Oh my gosh. Okay. We are a society, a global society that's a pendulum that keeps swinging one way or the other, right? We go to the one extreme and then the other. We don't know how to swing through the middle. What if we just started asking ourselves more critical questions? What don't you believe today? I started using that. I'm sitting at the cradle of civilization in Egypt right now, and I'm asking that very question. You know what I don't believe? I don't believe anything that I was taught about ancient Egypt. All of it is out the window. It has been for some time. It's completely gone. It's not anybody's fault. It's just that I'm late to the game. These dissertation papers that I'm reading are from kids who are 19. They're my son's age. They're 17, they're 18, they're 19. They're not book reports. They're critical thought pieces. These are future leaders of our society, and they are asking the right questions. We get so caught up on millennials and Gen Z and this and that and everything else. And I get people telling me, oh, well, millennials don't like to work hard and they don't know how to work. And Gen Z are just so, just entitled and this and that and everything else. You know what? We're not challenging them enough. Maybe they are coddled, but we're not asking the right questions. So everybody who's listening, I'm going to give everybody free parenting advice, even though I'm not a therapist. I'm going to give everybody free parenting advice. Ask your children today, what don't you believe? It's not about the teacher. Don't blame it on the teacher. This is your opportunity as a parent to ask your children, what don't you believe today? And let them say one thing, just one thing, and say, all right, what part of what you heard isn't being digested? What part of what you heard isn't making sense? And then when they tell you, don't try to convince them that it's correct. That's the other part of it, right?
Yes.
Right? Don't try to convince them. Great. What do you think? Let's go find out. And look, all of our lives move 100 times a minute. One of the things I admire about you the most is the fact that you raised your children. You found time for them. I've been gone from home for longer than I'd ideally want to be, and I miss my family. I want to go home.
Yeah.
Right. I'm tired. I'm beat up. I want to go home, but my brain is firing on all cylinders because I'm looking at this going, this is incredible. Yeah. And I'm bringing my family back here in March. You know what I'm going to do when I get here in March? I'm going to ask my son, now think about what you were taught. And now look at what I'm about to show you here. What don't you believe from what you were taught? Is there anything that you were taught that now is not making sense? And if there's one thing, fantastic. That's a rabbit hole we're going under. That's the rabbit hole we're going down. It is.
That's cool.
We get so caught up in right and wrong, right?
Right.
We get so caught up in right and wrong. Well, I'm right, you're wrong. You're right, I'm wrong. This is the way it's been done. This is what history says. Okay? Prime example. Upper Egypt is below Cairo. Why is it called Upper Egypt? I'll ask you the question.
I don't know.
You ask most people, they'll tell you, well, it's because the Nile River flows up northwards toward the Mediterranean. That's why it's Upper Egypt, even though it's south.
Huh. Or
Maybe.
was it higher in altitude? I don't know. What was it?
That could be it too. But east is west and west is east when you're talking about what they refer to now as the East Bank was the West Bank. What they're talking about, the West Bank was the East Bank. Or is it that in the earliest forms of civilization, we looked at the world upside down? And what's south is north and what's north is south. If what's east is west and what's west is east, then clearly what's south must be north and what's north must be south.
Yeah.
Oh no, my brain's gone. Your brain's gone cross-eyed, hasn't it?
Yes. It's not going to explode, but it's simmering.
It's simmering.
Yeah.
You have traversed so many waters. What if Alaska was in the south and not in the north? I know I sound crazy. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying it's not. After all, we can see Russia from our houses.
Well, yeah, I mean, but then that's just a label.
It's a label, correct? It's
Right.
a label.
But
right?
I get what you're saying. It's perspective. It's a 180.
It's perspective.
It's a 180 degree different perspective on
Right.
something.
Why did the first civilization, first functional, I'm not talking about Sumeria, Mesopotamia, the first fully functional civilization, why did they believe that Upper Egypt, what's south of Cairo, is Upper Egypt? And there's a myriad of answers. It could be that the river is flowing south to north. Could be. But I'll take that a step further and say, well, this is the White Nile that's through here. But the White Nile merged in Khartoum with the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile came from Ethiopia and Lake Tana. So which river are we saying is flowing south to north? Because Ethiopia is not straight south. It's a little bit off. But is that the case? The Nile merges in Khartoum, but then it goes down towards Lake Victoria. Which Nile flows south to north? Which Nile? Is it the Blue Nile? Is it the White Nile? Which one? Which tributary? It's a lake, Lake Victoria. Okay, which way does that flow? How did it become a lake? What about this? Where'd the river come from? You see how it's forming a bunch of other questions?
Yeah, sure.
It's not a finite answer, and it's not supposed to be. Right? The idea behind this exercise, and I know we're the society, we always say 1 + 1 has to equal 2. I agree. But instead of focusing on why 1 + 1 = 2, we should focus on all the different ways 1 + 1 can be written. Is it 1 + 1? Is it 2 - 1? Is it 4 - 3? Is it whatever? Right? What is it? How are we getting here? Right? 1 + 1 is 2. 4 to square root of 4. Whatever the case. There's a myriad of answers. I'm not asking you to choose one. I'm simply asking you to try to discover all the possible scenarios. Then you judge for yourself. Interpret it for yourself.
Sure.
This is my 5th visit to Egypt in the last 4 years. This is a place I've been coming to since I was a teenager because of where my family is from, where my mother is from. This is a place where, my father talked a lot about chosen family and given family. His chosen family has been here all along. And I asked my second father who's here, I asked him, and he's an archaeology by background. And you know what he says to me?
What?
It's thick Egyptian voice. Ashish, you are right. What am I right about? Nothing. You are right. Hey. Hey, man, what am I right about? Nothing. You are right. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. But then I stopped to think about it. I mean, he's actually got a point. How do we know what's wrong and what's right? So you're right. That's
You're right.
Answer. That's the answer. And he rolls his R's really well.
That's great.
And he has this contagious laugh as well when he laughs. It's absolutely hilarious. It's probably why I lost my voice. It's because I'm laughing hysterically like a hyena.
So much.
Oh, like a hyena. It's
God.
It's out there. And then, the funniest was today we're sitting, some of these vendors came up. Of course, all these places. And he goes, no, he's Egyptian. And they look at me and I just go, shukran. He goes, if he's Egyptian, I'm Chinese. So all of a sudden, the vendor says that. I'm like, oh, here we go. Wait, stop.
You're tall. Do you tower over most Egyptians?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. They actually all think I'm from either Punjab or from Pakistan, or actually today I heard I'm from Afghanistan.
Oh.
And then I said, Afghanistan? I said, my skin's too dark to be from there, but okay. I mean, I see the possibility. Sure. But then, of course, I got to thinking, well, all right, so be it. But again, just everything that you see. Case in point, one of the tombs I went into last year, it's one of these tombs that Netflix did a documentary on. It's not open to the public. And I know we know the archaeologist that discovered it. So we're able to get access to it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new layer they found. They found a mummified lion cub down there.
What? That's so cool.
Right?
What? A mummified lion?
Lion cub. Now, I didn't believe him until
Yeah.
we were crossing a bridge in Cairo just this trip, going from the hotel to Garden City. And there were two lions sitting, the statues of giant bronze lions sitting on both sides. So 2 lions, so 4 lions in total. And my second father here says, these lions were brought in. They were gifts to protect the city.
Mm.
Really? Do tell.
Mm.
And then I told him, well, I know we can find a mummified lion. These are bronze lions, but the mummified one is there. All of a sudden, I went down a rabbit hole. We know there was wildlife in Egypt. What kind of wildlife?
Mm-hmm.
Beyond what we know, was there actual, cats here? Were there elephants here? Was there whatever, right? What kind of wildlife was here? What was here? Who knows? Right. All I know is if I was in college writing a dissertation on this and he wanted 100 pages, I'd have 1,000. I mean, I don't even know where to even start in terms of asking these questions. But
you could make it a life career, I think, trying to.
I don't think I need any more careers. I think my hands are full. But you know what? I'll tell you what it did do. Right, this time of year, I normally get worn down by just the daily grind of the year. I get worn down. I'm on the last trip. I'm raring to go home. Right, I'm done. I'm ready to go home. I'm tired. I want to just get home now. I want to be with my family. I want, and this just was like a shot in the arm. This was like, I literally went from I'm tired to what's next. This is why, and I reached out to you and said, hey, we should record this week, but we're not supposed to record. And you don't look so good anyway. Like, let's just record. I want to record. And you could see why.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I mean, I had to get this out. This was just like, we need to think critically. What don't you believe today? What didn't you believe? That's the correct grammar. What didn't you believe today? Right? That's just that one question. I'm not talking about being cynical, although that maybe is part of it. I'm not talking about being skeptical, although that may be part of it. I'm simply talking about being critical. Right? The ability to think. We lost that ability. I'll never forget a conversation I had with, I guess you can call her my sister. That she's here and she's 10 years my younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember she was a protester in Tahrir Square during the revolution here. And I asked her on a call, I said, why did you go and protest? Her answer was, both of them said that because they both went to protest. Their answer was amazing. Their answer was, you educated me at the American University in Cairo. You taught me to think critically. What did you think was going to happen? Right. And I thought about that today. Actually, I've been thinking about that a lot on this trip because I thought that answer was right, because it led me to this point that I want to close with. And this point is that thinking critically is not the same thing as protesting critically. Thinking critically doesn't mean you're protesting. It could mean that. I'm not talking about protesting. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about, tearing down the establishment. I'm not talking about overthrowing anybody's government. I'm simply talking about thinking critically so that you can interpret things the way you see them. There are billions of people in this world, and we're trying to get them to assimilate to one belief. We can't get them to assimilate to one religion. How are we going to get them to assimilate to one belief and what happened in history? Good luck. If anybody figures that out, I have a Nobel Prize waiting for you.
Even in present, history, but even that translates it just into everyday life. Two people could see the same thing in the same incident and have a completely different take on it.
You're
even now.
Absolutely.
So how do you go back and resurrect even when you can't even stand in the present moment? And
you're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. Pretend I'm holding up a card, right? Like a deck of cards, just one card. Mm-hmm. You and I would see the same card, right? Let's say picture the card. Let's say it's a jack of clubs. Okay. You and I see the same card. You see the card. It's a jack of clubs. I see the back of card, and I know it's a jack of clubs. What I see is the thin edges saying this card has no depth to it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
We can't keep taking things at face value. Look, again, I'm not saying that somebody who is nice is not nice. I'm not talking about that. You could tell what a good person is and a bad person is. I'm not talking about that, right? I'm not trying to reinvent stranger danger for kids out there. I'm not talking about that. I'm simply saying that whether we are 5, 15, or 85, we must never stop thinking critically. I mean, 6,000 years of history is telling me right now at 47 years old that I didn't ask enough questions when I was 18 or 15 or 14. 6,000 years of history. And shame on me for not actually realizing that sooner. Right? So we need to actually just, again, I'm going to bring my kids here. My wife is going to be here with me in a few months. And I'm going to ask my son this and my daughter this too. Okay, you saw this. Now go back and think about what you learned in school. What didn't you believe? Yeah. Or what are you now not believing? Tell me why. Mm-hmm. And once they start explaining that to me, all of a sudden, a conversation starts from there. We have, and then if one person does it, I'm not talking about, and you know, think about this, okay? Think about it for a second. We're not talking about getting people to believe the same thing, because that's not possible. Mm-hmm. We've proven that over and over again. But do you think about this? Everybody, if we can get everybody to agree on think critically, that is the one thing everybody can assimilate to. That is the one thing everybody can agree to do because it's the easiest thing to do. All you're doing is asking questions. Mm-hmm. That's it. And it's not, why should I vote for you? Why should I buy this car from you? Why should I buy this house from you? Why should I do this today? It's, what didn't I believe today and why didn't I believe it? Pretty simple.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how's that?
All right. That's cool. That's a great way to end our year.
Absolutely right. So in a year like the year we've had, in a year where my father said goodbye to us, a year that I became closer to people that were there to support me, in a year that I was my most vulnerable and was able to pick up the pieces and make my life whole again, thanks to people like you. In a year like that, yeah, I think it's pretty fitting to end the year and go, what don't I believe? And what don't I believe? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It takes me back to when I said goodbye to my father. The doctor in that trauma room basically came out and said, he can't hear me. Oh, yes, he can.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, he can. Because I believe he can. Sure. I don't believe that he can't hear me. I believe he can. And that's my interpretation. And you know what? I'm taking that to my last breath because I believe that. Yes. Right? So I think critically about that. So think about all of our listeners. Think about this whole year. Think about everything this year before I say happy holidays to everybody, including you, my co-host and strength and just the anchor of this show. Think about this, all of our listeners. Just ask yourself this question in this year. Is there one moment where you heard something go, I don't know if I believe that. Mm-hmm. And what did you do about it when you felt that way? It's not too late. That's a New Year's resolution for you.
That's a good one.
That's it. Well, happy holidays. Happy holidays to you, Leigh.
Happy holidays to you, my friend.
I wish you and the girls the absolute best for the new year. I can't wait to get on our agenda for the new year. I'm super excited. I want to start recording for next year right now.
I know. It's a good one. It's a good one.
We got some good stuff coming up.
We do. I'm excited.
Till next time, everybody, be the success you want to be in your place. Remember, big successes in small places. Be that success.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. Would love to hear from you. See you next time.